The letter had been a foolish thing to write. Sarin knew this even as the ink dried on the parchment 3 nights ago. She knew it as she sealed it with plain wax, deliberately avoiding any mark that could identify her. She knew it as she pressed the folded paper into the hands of a traveling merchant and watched him disappear down the northern road toward the capital. Anonymous, she had told herself. The warning would reach the king's court. Someone would read it, someone would act, and she would remain what she had always been, invisible. A seamstress in a forgotten village at the edge of the Valdris kingdom, unremarkable in every way that mattered. But now, in the cold darkness before dawn, Sarin understood that anonymity had been an illusion. The knock came soft at first. 3 measured beats against her cottage door. Sarin's eyes opened in the darkness of her small bedroom, her heart already racing before her mind caught up to the sound. No one knocked at this hour. Not the baker seeking early alterations. Not Lord Varen's tax collectors, who preferred the dignity of daylight for their cruelties. 3 more knocks, patient, inevitable. Sarin slipped from her bed, pulling a woolen shawl around her shoulders. In the small room beside hers, she could hear Wren's steady breathing, undisturbed by the sound. Thank the spirits for that. Her sister was only 12 and had already seen too much of what powerful men could do. The fire had burned to embers, casting the main room in shades of amber and shadow. Sarin moved toward the door on silent feet, years of avoiding her father's drunken rages having taught her how to walk without sound. She pressed her palm flat against the rough wood. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice, low and resonant, carrying an accent she had never heard in person but recognized from the stories travelers told. Northern. From the wild territories beyond the mountain pass, the woman who writes warnings to kings should not hide behind her door. Sarin's blood turned to ice. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew it was her. Her hand trembled as it moved to the iron latch. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to wake Wren, to flee through the back window into the forest. But there was nowhere to go. If the king had sent soldiers to arrest her for treason, the village would already be surrounded. She lifted the latch. The door swung inward, and Sarin forgot how to breathe. He was not what she expected. Not the silver-haired monarch from the portraits that hung in Lord Varen's manor. Not the aging ruler she had imagined reading her letter with cold, distant eyes. This man was young, perhaps 30 winters, with shoulders broad enough to fill her doorframe and dark hair that fell in waves past his jaw. His clothing was travel-worn but fine, leather and wool in shades of gray and black. No crown sat upon his head. No royal insignia marked his chest. But his eyes were the color of molten amber, catching the faint light of her dying fire and throwing it back like a predator's gaze in the darkness. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You are smaller than I imagined," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but something beneath it rumbled like distant thunder. "A seamstress, living alone with a child, writing letters about assassination plots in my court. My sister," Sarin heard herself say, the correction automatic. "Wren is my sister, not my child." A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, perhaps, that she would correct a king, but then his expression settled into something more dangerous than anger. Curiosity. "You knew about the poison," he continued, taking a single step across her threshold. "You described exactly which cup would be tainted, exactly which servant had been bribed. You knew Lord Varen had paid for my death." Sarin's heart hammered against her ribs. "I only wrote what I saw." The words escaped before she could stop them. Foolish, reckless. The kind of confession that got women like her burned at the stake. The king went very still. "What you saw," he repeated slowly. "And how exactly does a seamstress in a village 3 days' ride from my capital see poison being placed in a king's cup?" Sarin's throat closed around any possible answer, because she could not tell him the truth, could not explain the visions that had plagued her since childhood, the dreams that showed her fragments of futures not yet born, could not describe how she had watched him die in her sleep, choking on wine while Lord Varen smiled, and had woken screaming with the taste of poison on her own tongue. "I think," the king said softly, stepping fully into her cottage and closing the door behind him, "that you and I have a great deal to discuss." The fire crackled as Sarin added fresh wood, more to occupy her trembling hands than for warmth. Behind her, the king moved through her small cottage with unsettling ease, his presence filling the space in ways that made the familiar walls feel foreign. "You should not be here," she said, keeping her back to him. "Lord Varen has spies everywhere. If anyone saw you arrive." "No one saw." The certainty in his voice made her turn. He stood beside her narrow work table, fingers brushing across a half-finished dress she had been embroidering for the miller's daughter. The delicacy of the gesture, such large hands touching silk with such care, sent an unexpected shiver through her. "You traveled from the capital alone?" she pressed. "With no guards? No escort?" His amber eyes lifted to meet hers, and something in them flickered, a hint of gold brighter than firelight. "I am never alone." Before Sarin could parse the meaning of those words, a sound from the back room made her spin. Ren stood in the doorway, dark hair tangled with sleep, rubbing her eyes. "Sarin? Who is—" The girl's voice died as she registered the stranger in their home. Sarin moved without thought, positioning herself between her sister and the king. Ren was everything she had left. Their parents dead 3 winters past. Claimed by the fever that had swept through the village, she would die before letting anyone harm the girl. "It's all right," Sarin said, forcing calm into her voice. "Go back to bed, little bird. I'll explain in the morning." But Ren's eyes had gone wide, fixed on something behind Sarin. When she turned, she understood why. The king had gone rigid, his head tilted toward the window, nostrils flaring as if scenting the air. In the dim firelight, his eyes had shifted fully gold, pupils elongated like a cat's. A low sound emanated from his chest, something between a growl and a rumble that raised every hair on Sarin's arms. "They followed me," he said, his voice rougher now, carrying an edge that scraped against her nerves. "Varen's hunters. They're in the tree line." Sarin's stomach dropped. "Hunters?" 6 of them, armed with silver. Silver. The word meant nothing to her and everything at once. Stories whispered around hearth fires. Legends of the northern kings who were not entirely human. Beasts who wore the skins of men. "Take your sister," the king commanded. "Hide in the root cellar. Do not emerge until—" The window shattered. Sarin screamed as a crossbow bolt buried itself in the wall inches from her head. She grabbed Ren, pulling the girl to the floor as more bolts followed, punching through the wooden shutters with deadly precision. But the king moved faster than any man should. One moment he stood by the table. The next, he was at the window, catching a bolt from the air with his bare hand. The wood splintered in his grip as he crushed it, and when he turned, his face had changed. The bones beneath his skin seemed to shift, his jaw elongating, teeth lengthening into points. "Stay down," he snarled, and his voice was no longer human. Then he was gone, launching himself through the broken window into the darkness beyond. Sarin clutched Ren to her chest, both of them huddled against the cold floor as sounds of violence erupted outside. Screams, growls, the wet, terrible noise of bodies being torn apart. "What is he?" Ren whispered, her voice tiny with terror. Sarin had no answer. Minutes passed like hours. Then silence fell, sudden and complete. Sarin's arms tightened around her sister as footsteps approached the shattered window. The king pulled himself back through the opening, and Sarin's heart stuttered. Blood covered him. His clothing hung in tatters, revealing a chest that rose and fell with labored breathing. A deep gash crossed his ribs, weeping crimson onto her floor. But it was his face that held her attention, human again, but pale beneath the blood, his amber eyes dimming. "Silver," he managed, swaying on his feet. The blades were tipped with something. Poison. He collapsed. Sarin was moving before conscious thought caught up to instinct. She pressed her hands to the wound on his chest, feeling the heat of his blood soaking through her fingers. Too much blood. The gash was deep, and already she could see dark veins spreading from its edges, the poison working through his system. "Ren, fetch my sewing kit, the curved needle and silk thread. Now." Her sister scrambled to obey while Sarin struggled to slow the bleeding, but even as she worked, she knew it wouldn't be enough. This was beyond herbs and stitches. The poison was spreading too fast, racing toward his heart. He was going to die on her floor, this strange king who had come seeking answers and found only ambush. Unless— Sarin's hands stilled as the familiar pressure built behind her eyes. No, she couldn't. The visions were dangerous enough. But the other thing, the gift she had buried so deep she almost believed it didn't exist. The king's eyes fluttered open, gold meeting gray in the dim light. "You see things," he rasped. "What else can you do, little seamstress?" His hand found hers, bloody fingers curling around her wrist, and at his touch, something inside Sarin cracked open. Heat flooded through her, starting where his skin met hers and racing up her arm like wildfire. Her vision went white, then fractured into 1,000 images. A great wolf running beneath a crimson moon, a throne of bones and shadows, her own face reflected in amber eyes, a voice calling her mate, mate, and mate. When the vision released her, she was gasping, her forehead pressed to his chest, his heart beating slowly and irregular beneath her ear, and his mouth was at her throat. She felt his breath first, hot and ragged against her skin, then his lips, tracing the curve where her neck met her shoulder with devastating gentleness. Some part of her knew she should pull away, should scream, and should fight, but her body had betrayed her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only feel as his teeth grazed her flesh, as something ancient and inevitable clicked into place between them. "Forgive me," he whispered against her throat. Then he bit down. Pain lanced through Saren's body like lightning, sharp and blinding. She tried to cry out, but her voice had abandoned her, leaving only a choked gasp as his teeth sank deeper into her flesh. But the pain lasted only a moment. What followed was something else entirely. Heat cascaded through her veins, spreading from the wound at her throat to every extremity. Her fingers tingled, her heart raced, and beneath the physical sensation, something stirred in the depths of her being, something that had always been there, sleeping, waiting. It recognized him. The king released her with a shuddering breath, falling back against the floor, his eyes glazed and unfocused. Blood, her blood, stained his lips. He spoke in a language she didn't know, words that rose and fell like music, like prayer. Sarin pressed her hand to her neck, expecting torn flesh and gushing blood. Instead, she found warmth. The wound was already closing, the skin knitting itself together with impossible speed. "What did you do to me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He didn't answer, couldn't answer. The poison was claiming him, pulling him down into unconsciousness. His breathing grew shallow, his skin taking on a gray pallor that spoke of approaching death. "Sarin." Ren stood frozen by the doorway, the sewing kit clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "Your neck. There was blood. I know what you saw." Sarin forced herself to stand on shaking legs. "But right now, I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me?" Her sister nodded, though fear still clouded her eyes. Sarin knelt beside the dying king, her mind racing. The poison was beyond any medicine she knew, beyond herbs, beyond stitches, beyond the knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother. But it was not beyond her. The gift she had spent her entire life hiding pulsed beneath her skin, awakened by whatever he had done when he'd marked her throat. She could feel it now, clearer than ever before, not just visions of the future, but something deeper. The ability to reach into the fabric of a person's essence and mend what was broken. "The thing we don't speak of," Ren whispered. "Mama's gift. You have it too, don't you?" Sarin met her sister's eyes. "If I do this, you can never tell anyone. Not ever. Do you understand? They burn women for less." "I know." Ren's voice was small but firm. "I'll keep the secret. I promise." Sarin placed both hands on the king's chest. She closed her eyes and reached inward, to the place where her power lived. It came easier than she expected, as if the bite had unlocked something that had always been hers. Light gathered beneath her palms, soft and silver, illuminating the small cottage like moonrise. She could feel the poison in his blood, a dark, malevolent presence that fought against her gift. But she could also feel something else. His essence, wild and ancient and burning with a fire that matched the one now kindling in her own chest. Their energies met, and Sarin gasped at the recognition. He was like her, not the same, but kindred. Two impossible things that shouldn't exist in an ordinary world. She pushed her power into him, driving back the poison inch by inch. It was exhausting, draining, like trying to hold back a river with her bare hands. But she refused to stop. This man had come to her door because of her letter, had protected her and Ren from the hunters who'd followed him, had taken silver blades meant for them. She would not let him die. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. Sarin lost track of time, lost track of everything except the battle being waged beneath her glowing hands. But finally, the poison retreated. The dark veins faded. His breathing deepened, steadied, took on the rhythm of true sleep rather than approaching death. When Sarin finally pulled her hands away, the silver light faded, leaving her cottage in ordinary darkness. Ren caught her as she swayed. "You did it. Sarin, you saved him." Sarin couldn't respond. The exhaustion was overwhelming, dragging at her limbs, clouding her thoughts. But through the haze, she felt something new. A thread of connection, gossamer thin but unbreakable, stretching from her heart to the unconscious king on her floor. The bite. Whatever he had done, it had linked them in ways she couldn't begin to understand. As if sensing her attention, his eyes fluttered open. Amber, purely amber now, with no trace of the gold that had blazed there before. He looked at her with an expression of such profound wonder that her breath caught. He reached up, his fingers trembling as they brushed her cheek, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear, the words accented but unmistakable. "My soul," he whispered in her tongue. "I found you." Then his eyes closed, and he slept. Sarin stared down at him, her hand pressed to the mark on her throat, feeling her world reshape itself around a single, terrifying truth. This was only the beginning. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of time. The king, Theren, as she learned from the fevered words he muttered in sleep, recovered with inhuman speed. By the second morning, the gash on his ribs had closed to a thin pink line. By the third, he moved through her cottage with the fluid grace of a predator, all traces of weakness erased. But he did not leave. Sarin told herself it was because he was still healing, because Varen's hunters might still be watching the roads, because leaving before nightfall would draw too much attention. She told herself many things to avoid confronting the truth. She didn't want him to go. "You're staring again," Theren said without turning from the window where he stood watching the tree line. Heat rushed to Sarin's cheeks. "I'm observing. There's a difference." He glanced back at her, one corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been amusement. "Is there?" 3 days, and she still couldn't look at him without her heart stumbling over itself, couldn't be in the same room without feeling the phantom warmth of his bite pulsing at her throat. The mark had healed completely, leaving no visible scar, but she felt it constantly, a second heartbeat beneath her skin. Ren had adapted to their strange houseguest with the resilience of youth. She peppered him with questions, he answered with patience Sarin hadn't expected from a king. Yes, he could truly become a wolf. No, he didn't eat people. Yes, his kingdom had mountains so tall their peaks touched the clouds. No, he had never met a dragon, but his grandmother claimed to have seen one once. "Your sister has no fear," Theren observed one evening, watching Ren chase fireflies in the garden. "She has too much fear," Sarin corrected quietly. "She's learned to hide it well." Theron's gaze shifted to her face, those amber eyes seeing too much. "As have you." Sarin looked away first. She always did. But on the third night, something changed. Sarin woke to find Theren sitting on the edge of her bed, his face illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window. She should have been afraid, should have demanded he leave. Instead, she simply waited. "I must go," he said, his voice rough. "My people will think me dead. Theren will use that chaos to tighten his grip on the northern territories." Sarin's chest constricted. "I know. You could come with me." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that extended far beyond a simple invitation. Sarin thought of the visions that had shown her his face long before he'd appeared at her door, thought of the way her gift had recognized his essence, had called it kindred. "I can't," she whispered. "Ren is too young for such a journey, and Theren would use my disappearance as proof of conspiracy. Every person in this village who has ever shown me kindness would suffer." Theron's jaw tightened. "Then I will deal with Theren before I return for you." "Return for me?" He reached out, his fingers tracing the place where his mark lay hidden beneath her skin. The touch sent fire racing through her veins. "You are mine now, Sarin." His voice dropped to a register that vibrated through her bones. "The bite was not meant to happen as it did. I was lost to fever, to instinct, but it cannot be undone. You carry my mark. My wolf claimed you as mate." Mate. The word should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into her chest like a key finding its lock. "What does that mean?" she breathed. "It means I will always find you." He leaned closer, his forehead pressing to hers. "It means no distance will sever what now binds us. It means when I have secured my kingdom and destroyed the man who tried to murder us both, I will return. And then, little seer, you will have a choice to make." He pulled back before she could respond, rising from her bed with fluid grace. "Wait." Sarin grabbed his wrist, desperate for one more moment. "How will I know you're safe? How will I know if you—" "You'll know." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that burned like a brand. "The bond flows both ways. You'll feel me, just as I will feel you." Then he was gone, slipping through her window into the darkness beyond. Sarin sat in the moonlight, her hand pressed to her heart, feeling the ghost of his presence already fading. But beneath the ache of separation, something else stirred, a thread of golden warmth stretching northward, connecting her to a heart that beat in rhythm with her own. He was right. She could feel him, and somehow, that made his absence even harder to bear. The first dream came that very night. Sarin found herself running through a forest she had never seen, her bare feet silent on moss-covered ground. Moonlight filtered through ancient trees, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. And beside her, keeping pace with effortless grace, ran a massive wolf with fur the color of midnight and eyes like molten gold. Theren. She knew him instantly, though he wore a form she had never witnessed. The wolf turned its great head toward her, and she heard his voice in her mind, intimate as a whisper. "Run with me, little seer." Sarin woke gasping, her body drenched in sweat, an ache between her ribs that felt like hunger and homesickness combined. The dreams continued every night. Sometimes they ran through forests. Sometimes they stood on mountain peaks overlooking kingdoms of ice and stone. Sometimes he was a man, holding her in ways that made her wake with flushed cheeks and trembling hands. But alongside the dreams came something else. Pain. It started as a dull pressure in her bones, easily ignored. By the end of the first week, it had grown into something sharper. Her joints ached, her skin felt too tight. Sometimes, usually at night, usually when the moon hung bright and full outside her window, the pain became so intense she could barely breathe. "You're getting worse," Ren said one morning, watching Sarin struggle to thread a needle with shaking hands. "You barely slept again." "I'm fine." "You're lying." Sarin set down her sewing, meeting her sister's worried eyes. "I don't know what's happening to me. The dreams, the pain, it's all connected to him somehow. To what he did, the bite," Ren said quietly. "Yes, but I don't understand it. I don't understand any of this." Before Ren could respond, a knock echoed through the cottage, not the soft, measured knock of Theren's arrival. This was sharp and demanding, backed by the jingle of metal. Lord Varen's soldiers. Dread seized Sarin's chest. She gestured urgently for Ren to hide in the root cellar, waiting until the trapdoor closed before approaching the entrance. She opened the door to find 3 armed men and, behind them, Lord Theren himself. He was a tall man, thin and angular, with a smile that never reached his pale eyes. "Mistress Sarin," he said pleasantly, "I do hope we're not disturbing you." "My lord," she forced her voice steady, "how may I serve you?" His smile widened. "The king's court has taken an interest in certain events that occurred in our humble village recently. Several hunters were found dead in the forest, a cottage with broken windows and blood-stained floors." He paused, letting the implications settle. "I've been asked to escort you to the capital for questioning. The king, you see, is quite curious about what happened here, as am I." Sarin's hands clenched behind her back, hiding their tremor. "I am only a seamstress, my lord. I know nothing of dead hunters." "Then you have nothing to fear from a few questions." Varen's eyes glittered with something dark. "Come now, mistress. My carriage awaits. I'm certain we can clear this misunderstanding quickly." It wasn't a request. Sarin glanced back at her cottage, at the hidden trapdoor where Ren lay silent. If she refused, Theren would tear the place apart, would find her sister, would have leverage. "Of course, my lord," she said, stepping outside. "I am happy to cooperate." As the soldiers closed around her and the carriage door swung open like the mouth of some waiting beast, Sarin felt the golden thread in her chest pulse with distant warmth. Theren. He was there, somewhere far to the north, but the bond carried no warning, no awareness of her danger. She was on her own. The journey to the capital took 2 days. Sarin spent them in Varen's private carriage, trapped across from a man whose pleasant smile never wavered and whose eyes watched her like a serpent tracking a mouse. He made no threats, spoke no accusations. He simply talked. About the weather, about his lands, about the unfortunate state of the kingdom since the old king's death, and about the wolves. "Do you know why the crown has declared the northern clans enemies of the realm?" Theren asked on the second morning, his tone conversational. Sarin shook her head, though dread coiled in her stomach. "They are not human, you see. Oh, they wear human faces, speak human tongues, but beneath that disguise, they are beasts, animals that mate and breed and spread their corruption wherever they go." Varen's pleasant expression never flickered. The previous king tried diplomacy, treaties, coexistence. And do you know what it earned him? "No, my lord." "A knife in the back." Theren leaned forward. "From his own wife. A northern woman he had taken as a gesture of peace. She bore him a son, and then she slit his throat while he slept." Sarin's mind raced. If this was true, if the current king was half, the boy vanished before justice could be done. Theren continued. "Spirited away to the northern territories, raised among the beasts. But blood will tell, won't it? The son of a monster will always become a monster himself." Theren. He was talking about Theren, the current king, Sarin said carefully. "The one who rules from the capital." Varen's smile sharpened. "A regent, merely. The boy beast still lives, still claims the throne is his by blood right. He sends letters, can you imagine? demanding his birthright, as if any civilized person would bow to a wolf wearing a crown. The letter, her letter, it had never reached the regent or any human court. It had somehow found its way to the exiled king in the north, to the man whose throne had been stolen, whose people had been hunted, whose entire existence had been branded as monstrous. "I see understanding dawning in your eyes." Theren's voice dropped to a purr. "Good. Then you understand why I was so interested when witnesses reported a large man with inhuman eyes being sheltered in your cottage. A man who fought off 6 trained hunters and vanished into the forest." Saren's pulse spiked with fear. "I know nothing of—" "Do not insult me." The pleasant mask fell away, revealing the cold fury beneath. Theren's hand shot out, gripping her chin with bruising force. "I know what he is. I know you helped him. And I know," his grip tightened, "that you possess gifts of your own. Gifts that allowed you to cure a poison specifically designed to kill his kind." Sarin tried to pull away, but his fingers only dug deeper. "The regent pays handsomely for women like you," Theren hissed. "Witches who can see futures, who can heal the unhealable. Your power could help us exterminate the wolf plague once and for all, help us refine our poisons, predict their movements, hunt them to extinction. I would never—" "You will." Theren released her chin, settling back against his seat with restored composure. "Because if you refuse, I will return to that sad little cottage and personally ensure your sister suffers for your stubbornness." Ice flooded Saren's veins. "Ren. He knew about Ren. She is just a child," Sarin whispered. "Children can be useful. The regent's alchemists are always seeking subjects for their experiments." Theren's smile returned, more terrible than his anger. Young bodies adapt so much better to the process of extracting magical gifts. The threat landed like a physical blow. Sarin felt her vision blur, her hands tremble. Everything she had done to protect Ren, every secret kept, every gift buried, it meant nothing. Theren would use her sister as leverage until Sarin broke, and then he would use them both until there was nothing left. "So here is my offer," Theren said as the carriage rolled through the capital gates. "Serve the regent willingly, and your sister remains unharmed. Resist, and I will begin shipping pieces of her to you one at a time until you reconsider." Sarin closed her eyes, fighting the scream building in her chest. And deep within her, the golden thread pulsed, faint, distant, but there, Theren. Could he feel her terror? Did he know what was happening? But even as hope flickered, despair smothered it. He was hundreds of miles away, fighting his own war. And she was here, trapped, with no way out and everything to lose. When the carriage door opened to reveal the towering walls of the regent's palace, Sarin stepped out on numb legs. She had never felt more alone. Sarin never reached the regent's dungeons. The attack came as the carriage crossed the palace courtyard. One moment, Theren's soldiers marched in formation around her. The next, shadows erupted from every corner, moving with speed no human could match. Wolves, dozens of them, pouring over the walls like a dark tide. Sarin threw herself to the ground as chaos exploded around her. Steel clashed against fang. Men screamed, and through the mayhem, a single wolf fought its way toward her. Massive, black-furred, eyes blazing gold. Theren. He reached her in seconds, his body flowing from wolf to man in a shimmer of shadow and moonlight. Before she could speak, his arms were around her, lifting her against his chest. "Hold on to me," he commanded. Then they were running, through corridors of snarling wolves and falling soldiers, through gates that hung broken on their hinges, into the forest beyond the capital, where the trees swallowed them whole. Sarin lost track of time. Lost track of everything except the steady beat of Theren's heart beneath her ear and the blur of green and shadow racing past. When they finally stopped, she found herself in a camp hidden deep within ancient woods. Fires burned. Figures moved between hide tents. And everywhere, there were wolves. "You came," she breathed, still clutched against his chest. "How did you know?" Theren's arms tightened around her. "The bond. I felt your terror like a blade in my chest. Nothing could have stopped me from reaching you." "Ren," Sarin gasped, suddenly remembering. "My sister. She was hiding when they took me. If Theren sent men back for her, she's safe." Theren's voice gentled. "I sent scouts to your village the moment I sensed your distress. They found her hiding in the forest behind your cottage. She's here, in the camp, waiting for you." Relief crashed through Sarin so powerfully it left her dizzy. "And Theren?" Theren's expression hardened to stone. "He will never threaten anyone again. My wolves made certain of that." He carried her to the largest tent, setting her gently on a pile of furs before a crackling fire. An elderly woman waited inside, her silver hair braided with bone beads, her eyes the same amber as Theren's. "So this is her," the woman said, studying Sarin with unsettling intensity. "The human who survived a claiming bite." Sarin's hand moved instinctively to her throat. "Survived?" Theren knelt beside her, his expression grave. "The bite I gave you was never meant for a human. It's how our kind mark our mates, binding two wolves together for life. When given to a human." He hesitated. "It should have killed you within moments. The fact that you lived is unprecedented." The elderly woman, who Theren introduced as Mira, his grandmother and the pack's elder healer, examined Sarin with clinical precision, her weathered hands pressed against Sarin's temples, her throat, and the mark hidden beneath her skin. "She has power of her own," Mira announced. "Strong power. It's been fighting the change, keeping her human. That's why she survived." "Change?" Sarin's voice cracked. "What change?" Mira's eyes softened with something like pity. "The bite doesn't just mark, child. It transforms. Your body is trying to become like ours, but your magic resists, treating the change as an enemy to be destroyed. The pain, the aching bones, the fever that came and went without warning. What happens if my magic keeps fighting?" Sarin asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your power will eventually exhaust itself, and when it does, your body will attempt the full transformation." Mira paused. "Without enough life force remaining, you will not survive it." Theren made a sound like a wounded animal. "There must be something we can do. Some way to help her through it." Mira was silent for a long moment. "There is an old ritual, from the time before our people hid from the world. It was used for humans who chose to bond with our kind willingly." "Then we'll do it," Theren said immediately. "It's not that simple." Mira's gaze moved between them. "The ritual requires the blood moon, which rises tomorrow night. It requires her to stop fighting and surrender completely to the transformation. And even then, it only improves her chances. 1 in 5, perhaps. Maybe less. 1 in 5. An 80% chance of death." Sarin felt the weight of that number settle over her like a shroud. But when she looked at Theren, when she saw the anguish carved into his features, she felt something else too, the golden thread that connected them, pulsing with warmth despite everything. "What happens if I don't try?" she asked quietly. Mira's answer was gentle but final. "Then you die slowly instead of quickly. Days, perhaps. A week at most. Die trying or die waiting." Those were her choices. Sarin reached for Theren's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then I'll try." His grip tightened until it almost hurt. "Sarin, I didn't write that letter so you could watch me fade away." She met his eyes, finding strength in their amber depths. "I didn't survive your bite and your battle, and Varen's clutches to give up now." Theren lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a fierce kiss to her knuckles. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Then we face tomorrow together." But that night, as Sarin lay sleepless in the tent, she felt the pain building again, worse than before. Her bones screamed, her blood burned, and deep within, she felt her magic flickering like a candle in a hurricane. She was running out of time. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky. Sarin stood at the center of a stone circle older than memory, her bare feet cold against ancient granite. Around her, the pack had gathered in both human and wolf form, their eyes reflecting crimson moonlight. Mira stood before the altar, chanting in a language that predated kingdoms. And beside Sarin, never releasing her hand, stood Theren. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "don't blame yourself." His jaw clenched. "Nothing is going to happen. You're going to survive this." But they both knew the odds. The ritual began with fire. Mira lit a ring of flames around the altar, the heat washing over Sarin's skin. Then came the words, ancient and powerful, spoken in a voice that seemed to multiply until it filled the entire clearing. Sarin felt the change start almost immediately. It was different from the random attacks of pain she'd suffered before. This was deliberate, focused, a wave of transformation that crashed through her body with devastating force. Her magic rose to meet it, brilliant and silver, trying desperately to push back the tide. "Let go," Mira commanded. "Stop fighting. Surrender." But Sarin couldn't. 20 years of hiding, of suppressing, of surviving by keeping her power caged. The instinct was too strong. Even as her conscious mind tried to obey, something deeper refused to yield. The two forces collided within her. Light and shadow, human and wolf, magic and transformation, and Sarin screamed. The sound tore from her throat as her body became a battlefield. She felt her magic burning away, felt her life force draining like water through sand. Through the agony, she was dimly aware of Theren shouting her name, of Mira's chanting growing desperate. Then, suddenly, silence. Sarin collapsed against the altar, her body still, too still. The flames around her flickered and died. The pack went silent, and Theren fell to his knees beside her, gathering her limp form against his chest. No. The word ripped from him like a physical wound. No, 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 Sarin, please, please. He pressed his ear to her chest, listened for the heartbeat that had synchronized with his own. Nothing. She's gone, Mira said softly, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. The magic took too much. There was nothing left for the change. Theron's howl of grief split the night. He held her body as the pack joined his mourning, as wolves raised their voices to the blood moon in lamentation. He held her as minutes passed, as hope drained away, as the reality of her death carved itself into his soul. I did this. His voice was barely recognizable. I killed her with my bite. I killed my mate. He lowered her gently to the altar, brushing hair from her cold face. Then he rose and spoke words that froze the blood of every wolf present. Prepare the ritual of ending. By my command as Alpha King, I will join my mate in death before dawn. Theren, no. Mira reached for him. The pack needs you. The war means nothing. His eyes were hollow. Nothing means anything without her. He walked from the circle without looking back. The hours that followed were the longest Sarin had ever experienced. Because she wasn't dead. She floated in darkness, conscious but disconnected, aware of everything happening around her without the ability to respond. She heard Theron's howl, heard his declaration, heard the pack's protests and Mira's desperate pleas, and she felt the transformation continuing. It hadn't stopped. It had simply paused, waiting for something, waiting for her. Surrender, a voice whispered in the darkness. It wasn't Mira's voice, or her mother's, or anyone she recognized. It was older than that, deeper, the voice of something that had existed since the first wolf ran beneath the first moon. You cling to what you were, but what you were cannot save him. Only what you can become has that power. Theren. He was going to kill himself. Because of her. Because he thought she was gone. Stop fighting, the voice urged. Choose the wolf. Choose your mate. Choose life. And finally, Sarin let go. The transformation hit like a thunderbolt. Bones cracked and reformed. Muscles tore and rebuilt. Fur erupted across skin that stretched and changed. It was agony beyond anything she had experienced. It was ecstasy beyond anything she had imagined. When it ended, Sarin opened her eyes to a world transformed. Colors she had never seen. Scents she had never smelled. Sounds from miles away as clear as whispers. She rose on 4 legs, shaking a body covered in silver-white fur, and lifted her muzzle to the fading blood moon. Her howl echoed across the mountains. In the sacred grove where the pack prepared for Theron's death, every wolf went still. The Alpha King, kneeling before the ritual blade, raised his head. His eyes widened. His nostrils flared. Impossible, someone whispered. Sarin ran. She had never moved so fast, never felt so powerful, never been so completely certain of her purpose. The forest blurred around her. Miles vanished beneath her paws, and through it all, the golden thread in her chest burned brighter and brighter, guiding her home. She burst into the sacred grove just as the elder raised the ritual blade. Stop. The word came out as a snarl, a bark, a sound that was somehow both animal and utterly intelligible. Sarin shifted mid-stride, flowing from wolf to woman with instinctive grace, and staggered to her feet before the assembled pack. Theren stared at her as if seeing a ghost. You're alive. His voice broke on the words. How are you alive? Sarin walked toward him on unsteady legs, her new body still adjusting to human form. She was naked, she realized dimly, but she didn't care. Nothing mattered except reaching him. You were going to die, she said, tears streaming down her face. You were going to leave me alone in this new body, in this new world, without you. I thought I'd lost you. He reached for her, hands trembling as they cupped her face. I thought I'd killed you. You saved me. She leaned into his touch. You gave me a reason to stop fighting, a reason to choose this. Around them, the pack had begun to murmur, shock giving way to wonder, grief transforming into celebration. The bond, Mira breathed. It's incomplete. She bears his mark, but he doesn't bear hers. Sarin understood. She had claimed nothing, had given nothing in return for what he had given her. The connection flowed only one direction, leaving him vulnerable while she remained protected. Then let me complete it. She met Theron's eyes. Let me claim you the way you claimed me. His breath caught. You would do that? Bind yourself to me forever? I already am bound to you. She rose on her toes, her lips brushing the curve of his throat. This just makes it official. When her teeth sank into his flesh, Theron's roar shook the ancient trees. Power surged between them, no longer a thread but a river, flowing both ways with equal force. She felt his heart become hers, his strength become hers, his pack, his kingdom, his very soul, all of it offered freely and accepted completely. When she finally released him, they stood forehead to forehead, breathing each other's air, bound in ways that transcended human understanding. "My mate," Theren whispered. "My king," Sarin answered. The pack erupted into howls of celebration. Wolves danced in the dying moonlight, and somewhere in the distance, Sarin felt another heartbeat, smaller and familiar. Ren, safe with the pack, waiting for her. She had come to this place a fugitive, a seamstress, a woman hiding powers she had never understood. She would leave it as something new, a wolf, a queen, a mate bonded to a king who had crossed a kingdom to save her, all because of a letter she had thought would stay anonymous. "What happens now?" she asked, still wrapped in Theron's arms. He smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes completely. "Now we go home, and then—" His smile sharpened into something fierce. "We take back my throne." Sarin laughed, the sound wild and free, echoing across the mountains she would learn to call home. She had found her pack, her mate, her purpose, and she would never be alone again. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story.